I'd like to call to order the December meeting of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board. Join me in a moment of prayer or reflection. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings of this life, including our ability tonight to meet in freedom. Guide us in our thoughts and deliberations, that we may make the best decisions for current and future residents of Morrisville. We also ask for your comfort and protection for those throughout the world who are working for peace. Protect those in danger and comfort those who are suffering. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Pause for a moment. So we're a full-strength board with one alternate. First item I'd like to discuss is the agenda, and it might be a good suggestion to switch 10A and 10B so that we don't unnecessarily bore the members of the public with our discussion of our appointment recommendations. Any other changes, suggestions from staff? Courtney?
No, sir.
We're okay with just flipping 10A and 10B. I'll request a motion to adopt the revised agenda.
Make a motion to adopt the revised agenda.
Do I have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Agenda is adopted. Thank you. So we have nothing on item 5. Anybody who wishes to speak in general to the Planning and Zoning Board? Thank you, Vice Chairperson. Item number 4. You all had a chance to review the minutes from November. Any changes? Motion to adopt the agenda? To adopt the minutes? Approve the minutes?
I'll move that we adopt the minutes.
Seconded.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any presentations, Courtney, is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
But there is a category number 6 for public comment. Anybody who wishes to speak in general, not about a specific topic on the agenda tonight, but in general. Seeing no volunteers, I think we'll move to item number 9. I'm going to introduce this one. Brian.
Good evening. I am Brad West of the Morrisville Planning Department. I am here to talk about item 2018-448-0, which is a request for map amendments for the properties commonly known as 6601 Kid Creek Road and 0 Lewis Stevens Drive. The Planning Department has submitted an application to rezone or for a land use plan amendment for the property commonly known as 6601 Kid Creek Road, and a zoning map amendment for that parcel as well for a portion of that parcel, and I'll get in a second what portion that specifically is. The Planning Department has also submitted a request for a zoning map amendment for 0 Lewis Stevens Drive. Before I get into those specific subject parcels, you may remember me coming to you earlier this year with the ETJ extension request item. And so that was essentially a request by the town of Morrisville to Wake County for them to transfer approximately 96 acres of short-range urban service area from their jurisdiction to our extraterritorial jurisdiction or planning jurisdiction in Morrisville. And so I'm happy to report that request was granted, approved by their board on November 19th. And so this is why the Planning Department has asked to go ahead and zone, apply our town of Morrisville zoning districts to those two subject areas. One important thing to note about that, though, is that there is a state-mandated sort of 60-day timeline for how long that current Wake County zoning is applicable. So after 60 days from approval, that zoning will expire. So this is why the Planning Department is requesting an expedited rezoning timeline. So I will go ahead and dive right into the actual subject areas. So for the first part of this, we have the Kit Creek Road parcel. This is for 6601 Kit Creek Road. This is located at the northwest corner of town near the Kits Creek subdivision. It's approximately, so if you see the area outlined in red, that is approximately 20.81 acres. However, as I mentioned before, that is not the entirety of the parcel. The parcel overall is about 25 or so acres. However, a portion of that parcel, a smaller portion of that parcel is already in Morrisville's extraterritorial jurisdiction, ETJ, and already has zoning. So for tonight, we're just focusing on this outlined area in red, the 20.81 acres. So the current zoning for this parcel is Wake County R30 zoning. The Planning Department wishes to amend the land use plan from medium density residential to very low density residential. The Planning Department would also like to amend the zoning map from R30 Wake County zoning to very low density residential, or VLDR. And in your packets should be attachment 2. There should be a memo that goes into detail of what is permitted in the Wake County R30 zoning for your information. The next parcel is 0 Lewis Stevens Drive. This parcel is approximately 52.77 acres. The Morrisville Planning Department is requesting a zoning map amendment from R30 Wake County to low density residential LDR Town of Morrisville zoning district. As for staff recommendations, staff recommends approval of the zoning map and land use plan amendments for Kit Creek Road parcel 6601 Kit Creek Road for several reasons. First, the request would help maintain the rural character that currently exists on the property. It is compatible with the existing zoning of the southern portion of that parcel that I talked about earlier that's already in the ETJ. The request would allow the current property owners to continue their agricultural uses. The request would meet the state mandated 60-day timeline that we discussed earlier for the Wake County zoning and that expiration. And finally, the request would protect surrounding property owners from potential noxious uses in the absence of any zoning. For the 0 Lewis Stevens Drive parcel, staff recommends approval for the zoning map amendment based on the fact that the request would result in a logical and orderly development pattern as is compatible with existing zoning to the east, namely the Breckenridge subdivision. The proposed zoning district is compatible with both land use plan designation and the zoning in the surrounding area. The request would meet the state mandated 60-day timeline for that Wake County zoning, and the request would protect surrounding properties from any potential noxious uses in the absence of zoning there as well. And this is just a summary of the action items associated with this. Land use plan, map amendment, zoning map amendment, consistency statement, the actual zoning map amendment for, this is all for Kit Creek Road parcel, and then a zoning map amendment, consistency statement, and a zoning map amendment for Lewis Stevens Drive parcel. Finally, there is a public comment session associated with this item, and that is all I have for this presentation.
Thank you, Brad. So I think we'll jump straight into the public comment session unless anybody has any burning questions right now. So I'd like to invite anybody who wishes to speak on either the Kit Creek Road parcel or the Louis Stevens Drive parcel to come up to the podium and speak. So for the record, if you could tell us your name and address, and then
Nathan at Mayo, 6601 Kit Creek Road, part of the Mayo family. In discussing the rezoning, of course, we are in favor of very low density, but that does not make us in favor of becoming a part of the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the town of Morrisville. And that is still based on the history of the community itself. Beginning 45 years ago, when Morrisville got a block grant to put water in the town of Morrisville, used the numbers in the Shiloh community for that block grant, but we never saw any of the water. Until 20 years later, with the Superfund site in the town and the Coppers Company poisoning the well water in the community, people still then were forced to annex into the town to get water, which we felt the town should have been obligated to give us or set up some kind of water district for people to be able to access clean, fresh water without being forced to annex into the town. Even then, some people were annexed into the town, like my sister Carolyn, who lives at 123 Church Street, who's been there for 6 years as the town, has been told it was surveyed to get sewer there and still has not had sewer. 3 years later, was still told sewer was coming. She still hasn't gotten sewer. We've been told recently that, it's planned for the spring, but we're not. I mean, there's a history of distrust and a reason for the distrust. We felt that, our interests have not been looked out for by the town of Morrisville. We certainly don't think it will be looked out for by being a part of the extraterritorial jurisdiction, and feel that, the small acreage that we have really wouldn't make a difference to the town anyway. So we're trying to figure out why it's so important that we become a part of the jurisdiction. So in saying that, we like low density, but we're still not in favor of being part of the extraterritorial jurisdiction. Right? Thank you all.
thank you, Ms. Mayo. Anybody else like to speak on either the Kit Creek or the Louis Stevens parcels? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public comment session. Invite Brad back to maybe questions. So let me ask you, Brad, some broad questions. I don't think we as a board are being asked whether or not to approve this is coming into the ETJ. What we're doing is looking at a rezoning and a land use plan change.
Correct. So the Wake County has already granted that transfer of 96 acres, which includes the 6601 Kit Creek parcel. So that process has already sort of been underway or has already been completed. What we're looking at now is the zoning that's going to be applicable for these newly acquired areas. As mentioned before, staff or the planning department is proposing a very low density residential district to make sure that we are compatible with what's currently there on site today.
I'd actually like to separate the two parcels as we...
Sure. Yep.
So previously this parcel then was not annexed by the town. It wasn't ETJ. It was kind of even further out. It was the short-range urban district.
Short-range urban service area. Yeah, that is areas that the county was doing their land use plan. These were areas that they thought each jurisdiction, all the 12 municipalities in Wake County, would grow into eventually. And so they designated a small portion of area that they eventually thought Morrisville would grow into. Morrisville is completely surrounded by other jurisdictions, so there wasn't a lot of short-range urban service area. And so this is the really the only area that we were able to acquire or at least include into our ETJ. This is not annexation. This is not having it incorporated. It's just simply ETJ. We are the first jurisdiction, as far as I'm told by Wake County, we're the first jurisdiction to completely take over their short-range urban service area. So this is probably the last frontier in terms of area to expand in.
So the only real material effect is that any planning is therefore under the town of Morrisville as opposed to under Wake County.
Correct.
So a more local environment where people can get
Be local control over that area as opposed to more the broad brush zoning that Wake County had.
And I think if my memory serves, previously any areas in Morrisville that were zoned as agricultural district, which was the old default, that's what it was, when the town was first incorporated.
Sure.
All of those areas, more or less all of those became very low density residential. So still allow the same uses basically as an agricultural district.
Correct. Yeah, we do have agricultural uses that are allowed there. We do not have an agricultural zoning district anymore. This is our lowest density residential district that we have in our UDO.
So there's no change to what is allowed in that property, and there's no change to the tax.
There's some subtle changes from the Wake County zoning R30. Those will expire in January. I think it's January 18th, whatever, 60 days after November 19th, which I think is January 18th. Those will expire. The very low density residential district does allow for multiple agricultural uses. I can't list them off the top of my head, but I did include a permitted use table which lists them. But yeah, it's minimum, I think it's about 1 acre lots and then above. So it's very rural in nature. It's meant to maintain those rural properties that were formerly agricultural areas under a previous zoning code before the UDO.
And nobody's taxes are going to increase as a result of this.
I can't speak to taxes. I don't know. For lots of factors go into tax reassessment, so I can't say no, can't say yes. I mean, those values are increasing.
But they won't be paying Morrisville taxes.
No, it'll still be. So the one thing we have is just planning jurisdiction. So that's kind of what the ETJ is all about, is sort of development control, so that we sort of protect the peripheries of the community. Yeah.
They also have a forestry exemption through the county, and that is not impacted by changing from one planning jurisdiction to another. That is maintained.
Thanks for that background.
Sure.
Rob, any questions for Brad or any comments?
I guess just to clarify, it's now an ETJ, but it's not in corporate limits. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. And so there are some other use restrictions that they wouldn't have had in Wake County that now that they would have to still conform to under the very low density residential.
So the R30, if I don't know if some of you have, I can pull up the attachment. But
Like sheds, outdoor buildings.
yeah, so there's
things like
plenty
that.
of stuff still allowed in the very low density residential. In the R30, it was a broader category. Since Wake County is a much larger land area, they had sort of broader brush zoning districts.
But I guess I'm saying now to build something like that, like an outbuilding, they would still have to go refer to our zoning.
They would go
table
through
now
our UDO, yes.
and make sure that it conforms with that very low density
Correct.
table. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Well, that's it.
I just want to clarify my mind.
Yeah.
The ETJ thing is a done deal. It's not a question of whether or not this happens. It happens.
So they've already
Well,
granted it, yeah.
Right, it's already been granted. So what,
November 19th at the Wake County Board of Commissioners meeting.
so we're just.
Just applying a zoning.
Pickens a zone.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thanks. That's all.
So I guess the worry is that if we didn't approve this, that someone in theory could submit plans for some crazy thing, whatever. And
Obnoxious use. Yes.
they would ask us to annex that area into the town, and we would not be able to necessarily restrict them. Is that what would?
Yeah, well, so our subdivision ordinance typically require, so we also have it depends on what they want. So if they wanted like water service, for instance, we have an agreement with Town and Cary where we'd require annexation. But you could, for instance, do deforestation or something like that. That would not be a annexation type thing, or it's just something that could occur that we would have no control over. But yeah, I mean, without the absence of, without any kind of zoning control, almost anything, as long as it meets state and federal regulations and building code, it could probably be proposed at least.
And then, so there's a lot, and sort of the documentation going back and forth. I mean, I guess we're looking at some stuff going, at one point it looked like they were talking about medium density.
So the land use
Parcel.
plan, yes, the land use plan from 2009 prescribes this area as like more of a medium density.
Which is what
more of an
Kitts Creek
extension
is.
of Kitts
Right,
Creek,
okay.
basically. And so in order to sort of maintain the current status of the property and to allow the current property owners to continue their way of life and have it remain agricultural in nature, we worked with them to come up with a zoning district that best fit that situation, and very low density residential is our absolute lowest residential zoning district.
So this is really sort of like, so like in the future, let's say they decided 20 years from now they wanted to sell, obviously at that point, then
come
they
for
would be
another
doing a potential rezoning or something at that point.
If they wanted to propose something different from, that's not allowed in very low density residential.
And then there's a lot of talk about schools. I mean, are we annexing this to just give it to Wake County for a school? I mean, I guess
We're not annexing it, yeah.
but eventually long term. I mean, we're taking, I mean, I guess why all the talk of schools and what size land they take? I mean,
To answer that question, it's no.
Okay.
So the reason that it was proposed to extend our ETJ boundaries to be consistent with the urban service areas, specifically short-range urban service areas identified in the Wake County plan, is to ensure that any development that occurs there in future is compatible with surrounding uses that are already within the town's ETJ and or corporate limits.
that's it.
Tim?
The only question is discussion around medium density. Any reason why that wasn't considered or moved to lower density? So, I mean, we'd have to do a rezoning later on if we wanted to do that.
Yeah, it's more restrictive, and we're trying to accommodate the existing property owners' current uses and the density that they have there today. And so we just wanted to make sure it's compatible with what is today. Doesn't mean, like saying earlier, that somebody could come forth with another rezoning for something else. So
I didn't look at the current zoning around it, but the Stam property and the other properties on the other side of the street, are they also VLDR?
So there's VLDR. So the overall parcel, there's a small, like, let's see if I can get back to this map here. There we go. So there is this overall parcel includes this chunk of land right here. It's not outlined, but it's basically where my mouse pointer is. That's already included in the town's ETJ. That's already zoned VLDR. The area in red is what Wake County previously had in their jurisdiction. Over here is you're getting into town of Cary, which has a completely different zoning code.
Yeah, there's a sliver there between 147 and the red outline property, and it extends across the street to one lot.
Right.
Yeah, just a sliver right there. Yeah.
So that is, I believe that's right of way for DOT. I think
Do you
DOT.
mind pulling up the attachment with the rezoning map on
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, here we go. And so this is all right of way. It will not be zoned.
Right.
It's R30 now, but theoretically it should not have a zoning application since it's a freeway. And
So
it's
the
DOT right-of-way.
green little sliver right there on Kit Creek Road,
The-
both sides of Kit Creek Road that borders it right there. Yeah, keep moving it. But the green, the forest green. What do you call that?
Those are
Well, the
MD or
brownish,
medium density
yeah.
residential.
Oh, this?
No.
It's medium density residential.
That's all medium. Okay, that's what I was
Yeah,
asking.
those will look green to me.
Because the incompatibility. That's the only question I had is, yeah. I mean, I think it's the right thing to do to match what the property owner would like to see there, considering that we're putting it into our ETJ. But it is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily consistent with those other properties, right? Because those are medium density.
Yeah, it's consistent with the rest of the parcel So that way, we're not having a parcel that's zoned two different zoning districts. It's all just one nice unified zoning district. But again, doesn't preclude anyone from coming in the future and proposing something different. Yeah.
Catherine, any comments or questions?
So we heard residents unhappy that the water and sewer hadn't gone up there. I remember the discussions many years ago, and I apologize that you haven't received that. But in light, so I understand some of the misgivings that our speaker had, and I guess what does this acceptance and rezoning do for the possibility of water and sewer, and then how do we get it faster up to these, the parcels that are not part of planned development?
So all parcels are all homes that were eligible to receive the sewer extension, with the exception of one home north of 540 have received that sewer extension. The only one that doesn't have it at this point, we're actually designing it currently, so it will be installed and connected. It's anticipated the construction will start in the spring, but there is right-of-way acquisition that's required as part of that design as well. We have shown the property owner where we are proposing to install. It's located adjacent to Church Street, and it ultimately will be in the future right-of-way of Church Street. And it will actually provide services to, or the eligibility to receive services to a parcel that's also owned by the Mayo family that surrounds the one that has not received services yet. So they have the ability, if they ever choose to add a house to that parcel, to tap into it as well. So and it's the least disruptive design to both the existing home parcel as well as any future development, if they so desired, to build on the other parcel that's owned by the family.
Excuse me. And by becoming, since they have become part of the Morrisville ETJ, they are also eligible to hook up to water and sewer?
So the water and sewer, concern from earlier is actually not even related to this parcel. It's a parcel on Kit Creek Road. So just kind of want to differentiate that. By coming into our jurisdiction as part of an ETJ, if you choose to develop, and if you choose that the particular parcel wanted to develop a home down the road and they wanted to receive water and sewer service, they would be eligible to do so. They would not be eligible to do so if they are located in the county. However, if they choose to do so, they would be responsible for extensions of those tap lines and service lines to service any future development. There are lines available in the area, so if they developed, they would be responsible for all costs, just like any other development would be responsible for the cost of hooking up to those services, but the services are available.
All right.
I think that since the ETJ seems to be going here, we should protect the property owner's existing rights as how they use the land currently, and go forward with the
Other discussion, comments on this one? So, and a motion, and just as a reminder, we have four full members here. So, Catherine, you discuss but not vote. Let you off the hook because this looks like an interesting set of. Anybody like to make a motion? Kit Creek one first.
I'll be the sacrificial
lamb. Read the whole thing. Just Kid Creek, yeah, just do the Kid Creek one. So I hereby make a motion
I
to.
apologize. Prior to doing that, we do need to close the public comment session. That
Oh,
has
sorry.
not occurred.
Thank you, Courtney. Seeing nobody else wishes to speak on this one, I'm going to close the public comment session. Arlene.
Okay, I hereby make a motion to adopt Resolution 2018-4480A, approving an amendment of the land use plan for property commonly known as 6601 Kit Creek Road, located north of Kit Creek Road and east of NC 147 to very low density residential designation, LUP 18-04.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Carried. Now need to consider the rezoning. The consistency statement.
As required by General Statute 16-0A-383, the Town Council finds that the requested zoning map amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and is in the public interest because the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan, is in the public interest because the proposed amendment supports the following policies in the town's adopted land use plan. 1, Policy 1A, promote growth and development and contributes to and builds upon the town's overall image as a well-planned, attractive, livable, and unique community in the Triangle region. 2, Policy 1E, develop and redevelop with detached residential land use outside activity centers when in context with surrounding uses. As a result, the zoning map amendment is consistent with the town of Morrisville's adopted plans. In addition, the requested zoning map amendment is compatible with existing uses on the subject property and will result in the continuance of those uses. Therefore, the zoning map amendment is reasonable and in the public interest. Therefore, I hereby make a motion to adopt Resolution 2018-448-0B pertaining to the adoption of a plan consistency review statement for a proposed zoning map amendment for a portion of the property commonly known as 6601 Kit Creek Road and located north of Kit Creek Road and east of NC 147 to the very low density residential zoning district REZ 1807.
Thank you, Harleen. Do I have a second for that motion?
A second.
Discussion of the motion? Call for a vote. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Carried. So now we have the land use plan amended. We have demonstrated there's some consistency. And now going for the hat trick, Harlan.
Okay. I hereby make a motion to adopt ordinance 2018-4480A, approving a zoning map amendment for a portion of the property commonly known as 6601 Kit Creek Road and located north of Kit Creek Road and east of NC 147 to the very low density residential zoning district REZ 1807.
Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion is carried. Thank you. So let's go back to the Louis Stevens Drive situation. If you can just bring up the other map, Brad. So this one, already the land use plan kind of in place.
Yeah, this is consistent with what the land use plan recommends. It's compatible with surrounding development east in Breckenridge subdivision.
Discussion or questions from the board on this one?
I've got a little question at the top of that map, the little piece that's on the other side of 540. Is this going to be consistent with that as well?
Yeah. So this was taken out. We intentionally did not propose this as a rezoning because it is state DOT right of way.
Right. No, I mean that little triangle there.
Yeah,
so that will then be consistent with what's above that as well as what's down below. Consistent in that it'll be zoned. If the zoning were to continue, it would be zoned
consistently with the rest of the.
All right, so so that property to the northwest of that, what is that, RTP land?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
Exactly what.
that is an RTP, so it's not going to be
Some
consistent
sort
with
of
that
island that's
zoning.
never really,
Do you know what's there exactly? I don't.
It's all part of this, it's the research, I forget the exact zoning, I'd have to look it up, but it is an RTP, and we don't have an equivalent necessarily to the research district that was located up there. And so we're looking up, Michelle's going to tell you the exact zoning district.
That particular parcel where the road extension would go right through, or is it to the west of that? Do you know?
The road extension just north of the triangle, a lot of it will be located, so Lewis Stevens extends, northwest, and will connect into that area. So a big portion of that triangle is already going to go to the Lewis Stevens Road extension as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can see a little bit of the right of way already here.
I guess, yeah, you can see on the top too, now that you mentioned that.
Okay.
I think I like the idea of this particular parcel going to R30. I don't know if the owners agree with it or not, but there has been a lot of development up along Stevens, and this road does need to get connected. And I think by setting R30, we add a level of intervention develop the property. Through the rezoning in addition to.
So I think it was R30.
Was there-
Yeah,
was
so the map shows the basically the existing zoning.
So that's the existing Wake County R30,
And it's going to go to.
low density
Low density.
residential, town of Morrisville zoning.
Right, so take out R30 from what I just said and very low density. I think that gives current owners of the property rights that they have and have had for time. And then it also gives the town some protection in terms of if or when they choose to sell the land or develop the land, having to go through the rezoning process again, since we could not necessarily assume that residential would be the idea you said.
Having it as part of the ETJ, again, is kind of a protection for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, we did look up the zoning of the RTP property. It's designated RA. I can't readily find what the RA stands for, but the assumption is it's a research type of district.
Ready to make a motion? And this one, the land use plan is already there, so this is 2 steps, not 3 steps.
I'll be happy to read it. So starting with the resolution, as required by General Statutes 160A-383, the Town Council, Planning and Zoning Board. Is that a misprint?
I think it should be Planning and Zoning Board.
Planning and Zoning Board finds that the requested zoning map amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and is in public interest because the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and is in the public interest because the proposed amendment supports the following policies in the town's adopted land use plan. Policy 1A, promote growth and development that contributes to and builds upon the town's overall image as a well-planned, attractive, livable, and unique community in the Triangle region. 2, Policy 1E, development and redevelopment with detached residential land use outside activity centers when in context with surrounding uses. As a result, the zoning map amendment is consistent with the town of Morrisville's adopted plans. In addition, the requested zoning map amendment is compatible with the existing uses surrounding the subject property and will result in a logical and orderly development pattern. Therefore, the zoning map amendment is reasonable and in the public interest. Therefore, I hereby make a motion to adopt resolution 2018-448-0C pertaining to the adoption of a plan consistency review statement for a proposed zoning map amendment, the property commonly known as 0 Lewis Stevens Drive and located northwest of Parkside Valley Drive and south of NC 540 to the low density residential LDR zoning district REZ 1807.
Do I have a second for that motion? Motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion is carried. That would lead us then to a discussion of the zoning map amendment.
We need to discuss, do you say discussion or motion?
Well, if anybody has any questions or discussion on that, I'll call for a motion.
So I hereby make a motion to adopt ordinance 2018-448-0B, approving a zoning map amendment for the property commonly known as 0 Lewis Stevens Drive, located northwest of Parkside Valley Drive and south of NC 540, to the low-density residential LDR zoning district, REZ 18-07.
The only thing I'd ask you to maybe change would be our motion actually would recommend approval. Approving.
Yeah, the motion would recommend approval.
I edit my recommendation to be a recommendation of approval.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Have a motion. Do it. Have a second for that motion.
I'll second.
So the motion is to recommend approval of adopting ordinance, etc. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. So we're going to move now to 10B, and we'll come back to 10A.
Good evening. I'm Natalie Nye, and the item before you is an administrative approval of a major site plan. The development is known as Bainbridge Aviation Crossing. The proposal is located at the intersection of Aviation Parkway and the future McCrimmon Parkway extension. The property is approximately 12.67 acres, and the developer is proposing 298 units in a multifamily development. The zoning of the parcel is conditional business activity center. Right across from Aviation Parkway, it's also zoned business activity center, and it's a similar land use. It's a multifamily development that's already been built. Bainbridge at Lake Crabtree. The parcel to the southwest is also a business activity center, however, it's vacant. And then across from the McCrimmon Parkway extension, we have industrial management and conditional industrial management zoning districts. Before you have a little bit of information on the parcel. Like I said, it's 12.67 acres, and that's after the right-of-way dedication. There are no floodplains on site. It's located in the Neuse River Basin, and it's already within the corporate limits of Morrisville. Here are some of the dimensional standards, all of which have been met per the UDO. Setbacks, lot coverage, maximum height, the required tree preservation, all have been met. I did want to point out that the required parking, they've exceeded that by quite a bit. 496 spaces versus the 433 that are required. And the overall net density of the site is 23.52 dwelling units per acre. Before you have your site plan, the development consists of primarily two large buildings, building A and B. That's where most of the 298 units are. And also a clubhouse, pool, and other amenities. There are also 4 accessory buildings on the site, as you can see down here where my cursor is, 3 of which are carriage-style buildings. They'll have 6 garage units and then 2 dwelling units above the garages. So there's a total of 6 dwelling units in these carriage-style houses. And then 1 over here is just the 6 garages. Access to the site is from Aviation Parkway, which is a right-in, right-out. And then the same is right-in, right-out along McCrimmon Parkway. There will also be a left turn in from McCrimmon Parkway. Right now, this is under construction, as you probably know. The McCrimmon Parkway extension is planning to be completed in 2020. It'll be a 4-lane roadway. It'll have a planted median and associated turn lanes at the intersection. There will also be 8-foot wide multi-use path on both sides of McCrimmon. And the street lights as well are shown on the plan. Those will be installed by the town of Morrisville. Aviation Parkway, which I'm sorry is a little bit cut off, will also have improvements coming soon, a little bit later, planning construction about 2023. The road plans are in design at this moment. It's going to be a 4-lane roadway as well with a median and then the associated turn lanes at the intersection. Because the plans are currently underway and being developed, and this is an NCDOT project along Aviation Parkway, the NCDOT has not given the developer an encroachment agreement to install the 2 streetlights that are required, as well as the pedestrian improvements along Aviation Parkway. So the developer is proposing a fee in lieu, a payment in lieu for those 2 items, and that will be paid at 150% and will be installed when the road is widened. A little bit about the cross-access to other sites. The development is proposing a cross-access easement to the parcel to the north, and the cross-access was waived for the parcel to the southwest due to the existing wetlands that are located along that property line. Here you can see an excerpt of the landscape plan. This shows the landscaping that surrounds Building A. All of the landscaping internally around the buildings, parking lot area, and the buffers are all up to code, up to the UDO standards, with the exception of an administrative alternative landscape plan that was approved by the planning director, and that really talks about just the buffer to the southwest. Here's the wetland that I spoke about. It's also a tree save area. So the alternative to the landscape requirements is just to widen that buffer to include all of those trees to count towards the buffer requirements. And that's the same for the small portion of street yard buffer along Aviation Parkway. It's just a spacing requirement that's being exempt, and that's because of all of the existing trees that are here in the wetland. Here are some of the elevations for the buildings. At the top of the slide, this is a portion of Building A, and that's running along McCrimmon. At the bottom of the slide is an internal elevation, which also shows the entrance to the clubhouse. You also see the color and material chart. All of the requirements for the materials, the facade, fenestration, that's all been met per the UDO. Here are the full elevations for Building B. At the top, this runs along Aviation Parkway, and at the bottom of the slide, this will run along McCrimmon. These are just an example of what the carriage house buildings that I was talking about before. These are the elevations for that. And there are 3 of these. There was a transportation impact analysis done for this site, this specific development, and it is predicting that there will be an additional 1,942 trips 151 of those in the AM peak hour and 183 in the PM peak hour. I already discussed the Aviation Parkway and McCrimmon Parkway road improvements, but they're up on the screen as well. The development is also paying a parkland payment in lieu, and that's a per unit cost, and there are 298 units. There'll also be private amenities on the site, including a pool, a dog park, clubhouse. And then we also did a school impact estimate. This is an estimate. This calculator is specifically for Morrisville, and it's based on density. It's estimated that about 63 students would come out of this development, and this isn't set in stone, but it would be predicted that they would go to Northwoods Elementary, West Cary Middle, and Cary High School. And again, this is an estimate. Staff recommends approval for this major site plan because it is consistent and complies with the UDO. There are 3 recommended conditions. The first is a payment in lieu for the street lights along Aviation to be paid prior to construction plan approval. Second, similar, but it's just for the required pedestrian improvements along Aviation Parkway. That be paid before construction plan approval. And the final condition is for the parkland payment in lieu to be paid before the issuance of the first building permit. And then on this final slide, you'll find the resolution in motion for you for this item. And I'm available for any questions as well as the developer.
Start with Catherine. Any questions for Natalie? Need a moment to think?
Yes, please.
Tim. Well, let me fill in some air here. So, Natalie,
Sure.
This is an administrative item, therefore, unless we find something egregious, like a safety issue, then more or less kind of have to follow the formula if it meets UDO.
Correct,
Right.
correct. It does meet UDO.
Catherine.
When reading this, the waiver has been granted according to the UDO to grant the waiver requiring the burial of overhead lines along Aviation Parkway.
Yes. So Duke Energy has a policy for undergrounding utilities, and that is for it to be at least 1,000 feet in linear feet. And this site only has about, I think, just under 500 linear feet along Aviation, which is where the overhead utility lines are. So per Duke Energy's policy, we're not able to underground them.
So my understanding, want these underground eventually. What do we have on either side of this project that will enable us to break the minimum required by Duke, understand?
Sure.
And then how does that get paid for?
The town's currently developing a policy regarding including the conversion of overhead lines as part of a betterment through road widening projects. And so the thought is, if council were to approve this policy, that as part of all road widening projects, that there would be a portion of the cost covered through the road widening, but the difference in the conversion, the town would subsidize. So that all existing lines would be converted underground. It's a policy that's currently being written. It has to be approved by council, but that is what we are considering drafting at this point at the staff level for council to consider.
The utilities, would be buried underground within the project.
Yes.
Thanks, Catherine. Tim.
Just a clarification. So this is only residential. There's no retail space within this area?
Correct.
Okay. And then the second is more for clarification around how do we arrive at the 151 and 183 trips respectively? So is there comment on the type of units, the number of bedrooms in.
Sure, if you don't mind. Have our transportation planner answer some transportation questions.
I'm assuming the AM and PM peak trips, is that correct?
Exactly. So, well, a couple of questions there. So the first is like, how do we arrive at that number of trips and the number of parking spaces and the number of units there?
It's based on the ITE trip generation manual. When this came in, we went through the 9th generation. So you use the land use code, which was at time was, I believe, 220, which was apartments. Essentially, it is ITE studies sites across the country and develops certain generation based on units. That was not a determination based on the 1, 2, 3 bedroom count. So it's kind of just a general 1 unit.
One of the applicants' team members here that prepared the transportation impact analysis. So if you have very specific questions, he's able to answer them too, I believe, as well.
And part of it is just to get an understanding, because we've had some projects like this where we've had the estimate and then we've seen them come to fruition. So, are we taking a view of the estimates and what they pan out to be? So when we think about the number of trips that we've estimated, what they ultimately become, the number of anticipated kids that we would have in a school system, what they ultimately become, and how are we getting at that analysis? But that's a general question. I don't know if that needs to be tabled, but.
Philosophically, the way this works, and this is TIAs, throughout the area, the manual is used, and so the manual is updated. There's different generations, and it's through comprehensive studying of what impacts a specific use has on the network. So that is used to prepare them. I'm going to turn it over to the engineer of record for the TIA, so that way they can go into a little more detail and explain it. But it's not arbitrarily pulled. There's a history of gathering that goes into that, which prepares those manuals.
So let's do that since we have the resource here. Thank you.
Hi there, Richard Adams with Kimley Horn. And your staff did a great job of explaining a little bit about the ITE trip generation manual as the source for that calculation. And it's actually an extremely robust data set, especially for something like apartments. And it really is the best resource, rather than, it would be a better source than counting a few local sources here, because it has such a big, robust data set, hundreds of counts, I'm sure, for a land use like this. So anyway, you simply take, it's either a simple linear equation, or in some cases logarithmic equation, based on those counts and and what we would expect for this number of units. We actually calculated for 300. As you know, it's down to 298. So this is actually a few higher than reality. But yes, it's actually a really good, and it's really the expected data source for a project like this. So, thank you.
Do you believe the same question came up with the trailside development in terms of the number appearing to be low when it was compared to the number of units? But this really is peak hour. I'm not sure what the peak hour were for this particular study, say 7 to 8 in the morning or 5 to 6 at night. But usually those trips, some people leave a little earlier for work than the peak hour. Some people leave a little bit later. And so there are additional trips, but they're distributed throughout the day and not maybe necessarily just during that set period of time.
Thanks, Tim. Lee.
No, the only question I've got, I guess, I'm assuming that it is too close to the intersection of aviation to get a light and full movement out at the rear.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, because obviously if something else is built in Southport, it seems like there's probably going to be some alignment of driveways there, and people are going to just be crazy with the U-turns. But
Yeah, it's generally 1,200 feet from intersection spacing, and is well with there's not that maximum space. And then NCTOT was actually involved in the in reviewing the movements, and they approved the left end. So that was
Well,
they were
they're in love with
way
U-turns, so that
Yeah.
that doesn't surprise me. So that's my only question. Really.
Thanks, Lee. Harleen.
I'm beginning to think that dog parks may be our most, popular private amenity in these developments. First of all, Courtney, Shaw, I want you to understand, I know this is an administrative decision, but I feel like the thing that I have feared has come upon me. We're going to have two great big, ginormous apartment buildings right across from each other. And it's like, okay, I know it meets the UDO, but I'm just saying, just a little protest there. That's all.
I think it meets the UDO. So I recommend go forward.
Natalie, can you explain to me again you're not going to have a cross-access requirement to the south because that's wetlands.
Sure.
What was the other one that's not going to be there?
They are providing an easement and a little stub road. I'm not sure if you can see it. Oh, great. So the parcel to the north here, they are providing an easement that's right here to cross into there. However, they aren't doing the pavement right up to the property line because I believe there's some really steep grade changes, but they are providing a PIL for that. And so that easement is there, and if and when this parcel does develop, there will be a cross-access there.
Okay, well, kind of my internal alarm bells are ringing because of CVS and Bristol Place, where we wanted a cross-access, but it turned out that topography wouldn't allow it.
Okay.
So are we going to find ourselves in the same situation?
No, for a couple different reasons. So one, they are required to dedicate all the construction easements. So what we used to do is basically say you are required at such point in time in the future that somebody wants to connect, you have to allow the connection. It's kind of how we used to do it. Now we do it as you build up as far as you can without having to obtain off-site construction easements. And then you provide easements on your own site that expire at such time that the connection is made. In this particular instance, there's actually retaining walls that are involved even to make this grade change. There's some steep grades in here, so there are retaining walls that they are installing. And the only reason that's really driving them not taking the pavement as far as some of those retaining walls is actually storm drainage. It's the storm drains. They would actually have to put in another inlet and change the design in order to actually basically build asphalt, add additional impervious, and put in a storm drain to catch because it's of the steep grade changes. Otherwise, they would have actually built further. So they're putting in PIL for that information, or for that, and then the stormwater will be caught on the next one as part of the curb and gutter as it's extended and collected there. So it's a much better process than what we used to have.
Thank you. Very reassuring. Okay. This is at that intersection, as Harleen said, across the street, we've got more apartments. And when we were looking at the site plans for those and the rights of way and so on, there was a lot of discussion about pedestrian access to the greenway. There's, I think, now a dedicated crosswalk that goes across Evans so that people can walk along Evans and then cross and go, well, eventually, I guess, to walk around Lake Crabtree. Mm-hmm. So it sounded like we're not going to have pedestrian facilities until 2023.
Along aviation. But McCrimmon will have a multi-use path on both sides, 8-foot multi-use path, and that is expected to be completed in 2020, which I think lines up to about when this development would open.
Okay, and then how do you get from there, crossing aviation, onto Evans as a pedestrian?
I'm not sure.
The
Our
applicant will
developer's
come
coming
answer
up.
the question.
And I'm going to invite the applicant to come and tell us. Thank you.
But until aviation's completed, there won't be a crosswalk there.
There's a crosswalk, right?
I'm Dan Miller. I'm with Withers Ravenel. There's a crosswalk that crosses Evans at the intersection with McCrimmon. that connects to the multi-use trail that runs along McCrimmon.
Crosses Evans, but doesn't cross Aviation.
Crosses Aviation, excuse me.
Okay.
Pardon me.
So as a pedestrian, I could come out of one of these apartments and cross over Aviation safely, walk along Evans, cross Evans, go to Lake Crabtree.
I suppose we honestly didn't study it all the way to the lake, but
Right.
we provided accessible access to the right-of-way.
So even in 2020, there'll be the ability for a pedestrian to cross safely over Aviation.
That's correct.
And once again, that is intended to be a temporary condition. Really, NCDOT's position was once the designs are known, then they would have a better idea of what the ultimate location of those improvements would be, both the streetlights and the pedestrian improvements, but did not want to approve an encroachment agreement, have something installed that was going to be ripped out and potentially relocated soon thereafter.
Thanks, Michelle. So again, the improvements to the right-of-way on Aviation are not until 2023. Just to follow up on Catherine's point, so we're not going to be faced when we do put the power lines underground with digging up landscaping and sidewalks and things.
Right.
Will be raw and therefore low cost.
Right. I think that is one of the main concerns about installing things with that encroachment agreement. So once everything is widened, we won't be disturbing things. Overhead utility lines can be undergrounded, things like that.
And by then, with luck, we'll have a town policy that subsidizes where necessary. Okay.
And the easement is being provided to accommodate future burial.
Right. That was all my questions. Anybody else got any follow-up or discussion?
It just calls into question, not the question of this particular plan, but the use of business activity center. And, I thought when these activity centers were created, it was supposed to be with preferential mixed use. Was it not? And did we, I guess the question is, did we not get maybe aggressive enough to specify a certain minimum of different varying uses in some of these areas where we did business activity center? Because now we have, like to your point, a bunch of apartments in something that's called business activity center, which to me we could have just said high density residential and it would have had the same outcome, right? And so I'm just curious as we go through, the most updated version of our land use planning. I know we're not changing the UDOs, but I think being more specific about that, because if the town wants us to, if council and the town, town residents want us to be, growing in more walkable ways and not building a bunch of apartments, which obviously they protest when we do a rezoning for just apartments, right? So if this was a rezoning right now, I don't think anyone would pass it, right? But if it was a rezoning with something that was more mixed use, maybe they would. And so I think we're looking at now the effects of what we put into place years ago, and we see them being utilized in a certain way that maybe wasn't designed. Just worth calling out and talking about in the future, I think. So, do you guys agree, or
So
staff?
one of the things that we've talked to the consultant about, and it's not just staff, it came up through multiple stakeholder interviews, is how do you ensure diversity of uses? So, in theory, if you had a corner that had 100 acres as an activity center, how do you ensure there's diverse use? Most likely, instead of, in the past, we've had percentage breakdowns per parcel. That has not worked successfully. Actually taking a look at overall over that area, making sure that you don't have dominant uses, that there's a mix of uses within it. It's very difficult financial-wise to actually have mixed-use developments. The financing on is just a little bit different than financing for apartments or financing for retail or financing for office. So then how do you have a mix of uses at that intersection? Setting up percentages, I suspect is probably the direction it may go, but we're really waiting for the recommendations from the land use plan consultant, Housley Levine, to help define what those would need to be or what the direction we need to go, and then make sure they're codified. through part of the UDO. I mean, percentage-wise, if you look back, the first one where we broke down percentages or prior to requiring percentages was Bethany Village, and it ended up with no residential. It was just kind of a horizontal and vertical mixed use. Then we ended up adding percentages in, and honestly, they far exceeded those percentages for residential for Grace Park. And then we had the same percentages in place is where Park West really evolved into. But we also had a lot of projects that didn't move forward over the time that were great projects, but the percentage created an issue. We do have now, if you do a mixed-use plan development district, there is a percentage, the maximum amount of residential that's allowed, 80%, I believe it is. So that ensures there's always 20% non-residential. But that doesn't get at the heart of activity center districts as a whole. So we most likely are going to have to look at something as districts as a whole and not on a development by development basis.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to think that, you know, something else across the street in a 100% nature could be complementary to a 100% residential on the other side, but we can't force that next parcel to be complementary, and most likely in our history it will be residential. Right? So,
well, and that's the purpose of getting as a whole. So, for example, if you capped residential at 50%, you know, of gross floor area, or however they're going to come up with it, if the next parcel came in and wanted to build, have they met that cap or not? So then it requires them to start installing some of those complementary uses. So when you look at the entirety of it, it becomes mixed use in nature, or an activity center and district in nature versus just a parcel by parcel development. I mean, if you looked at Park West, for example, I mean, it's phased. You know, one phase has a giant retail. Imagine if that was the Target portion was built, and then some of the restaurants were built, and then some of the apartments were built. They could all be built by different. You just happen to have one person that facilitated that. The question is, how do you change your code to facilitate that? Same thing without having one developer.
it may be too late for us. There's only so much land left. But, you know, it's just learning purposes, I guess. Interesting question.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So are we ready to move ahead with the motions?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2018-446-0, approving a major site plan for Bainbridge Aviation Crossing to be located at the southwest corner of Aviation Parkway and McCrimmon Parkway.
Recommending approval.
Yes.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you, gentlemen, for attending tonight.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda this evening is preparing your recommendations for both chair and vice chair that can be presented to town council for their formal adoption and action. What we're going to do is Marty's going to pass out ballots. You are welcome to discuss amongst yourselves if you would like to continue serving in your role. There is no cap per the UDO of how many terms you can serve as either chair or vice chair, and in which order those terms occur. If somebody is currently not serving a role and would like to serve a role, or somebody has absolutely no desire to serve a role, this is your opportunity to kind of to facilitate that discussion. The only people that are actually eligible to fill out the form and make a recommendation and vote are those who are actually eligible to vote tonight. But we're going to go ahead and just do the chair first, and once the chair is selected, then we'll move on to the voting for vice chair. Chairman, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, despite having flubbed the beginning of the agenda and missing an item or two, I think I still have enough faculties to continue if you would like me to continue, but I will not be at all offended if you want to vote for somebody else. So, Anybody else want to speak about whether they would like to be chairperson? Put it on your resume, or you're running for council, or... Well, that's one thing I should say. I'm not eligible to vote nor become a council member, so it's not a hidden agenda that I have. So.
Hanging chads. Do you need to
Chads.
have the absentee ballots coming?
I'll let you know after I'm done looking at them as to whether or not there are. And if there are, I'm going to question whether or not you pass like the SAT and filling in the circle.
Or was just to fill the circles? No.
So the recommended nomination is for Peter Pritchard to continue as the chair. We can move on to nominations for vice chair. And I'll turn that discussion back over. If somebody wants to advocate and continue serving their role, or if somebody wants to fight for a position, you're welcome to do that as well.
Peter, you can't be vice chair also.
Ineligible.
I wouldn't mind continuing, but it would not kill me if somebody else wanted to be vice chair, okay?
Here, would you like your pen back? Marty, you can have your pen back. Still town top property.
So do we need to make a formal motion on that? No, good.
I would. We don't need to, but for the record, why don't we go ahead and do so?
I guess nice then if somebody would make a motion recommending the two.
I will make a motion that per the vote earlier that we recommend Peter Pritchard as chair and Harleen both as vice chair.
A second.
Comments on that motion? I guess I'm allowed to vote on that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. It'll still be 3-3.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Chair, if I may, I will move on to staff comments. If I can get the button to pop up again to make this small. Oh, there we go. So for some new development applications, unless you have eagle eyes, I'm not sure anybody was going to be able to see that. We had two new development applications. One is for the new site plan and construction plan for 4540 Phase 2. It's an office building located on Slater, just south of 540. There's an existing Phase 1 building that's already built, and so it's located between that building and 540. The Church Street Sewer Extension, that was the project that was referenced earlier this evening. That project was also formally submitted and is currently in review. As for administrative approvals, there were no approvals in November. Town Council did approve the alternative equivalent compliance for the Wake County Public Library, which should start construction here soon. And actually spoke to them today, and they're going to start clearing trees here really soon. And really in January, we expect the site to be cleared. So you'll be able to get an even better idea of where the library will be located. In other news, we did have a very successful community-wide visioning session that took place. All that data is now currently being analyzed, and it will yield 2 alternatives that will be brought back to this board in March. So please mark your calendars for the March meeting. I think it's an extremely important one that everybody attends. And based on the feedback provided on those alternatives, they will then really kind of take your answers, put them and your responses into one alternative, which is just going to be what they're going to build out. That will be presented to council at their second meeting in March, which will then move on to the intense building of the models of what these areas, 3 sub-areas, could potentially look like. And we'll start leading into many of the recommendations, and they'll start drafting the plan. So this was really the last step before we're really starting to see some of the pen to paper, if you will, with regarding to the drafting of the plan. The plan's still on schedule to be adopted, hopefully in 2020, and we're trucking right along with the different items. We discussed the item tonight, but the ETJ extension was approved on November the 19th by the Wake County Board of Commissioners. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
The land use plan, Courtney, so the major activity will not correspond with the activity for budget. It'll be somewhat after that. Is that right? Correct.
So we will prepare everything and make sure I'm understanding your question. Budget as in the fiscal budget here? So yes, once all of this area comes into play, I think we'll have a good draft before we go into the FY21 budget. We won't have enough information to really implement any projects into the FY or make any recommendations for any funding initiatives into the FY20 budget. But definitely we would have some probably tentative in place even prior to adoption. We're doing that actually now with the transportation plan. We are currently, I think we start the interview process next week on our public transportation study. It was actually one of the initiatives in the CTP. We're just started it earlier than the adoption of the CTP, so we can get public transportation expanded here even earlier. So we will sometimes ask for funding kind of out of order, if you will, when we know there's a solid foundation in place for certain items prior to adoption.
Any other questions for Courtney?
On the land use plan, so will March be the time frame when we also get part of those alternatives, some of that consolidated feedback, like block by block? How can we get into some of that thing and kind of understand what the community has said about the specific development block?
We're not going to get block by block. What we're going to get is the sub area. So we had our general first round of feedback, which was used for really the trends and analysis report, which was presented already. And then we had the block by block, but then we added yet another layer of specific sub areas. So that included our TAC, which is our Technical Advisory Committee. They performed a visioning session, and then we had a visioning session that was open to the general public as well. So the alternatives are going to be for those sub areas. So excluding some information for block by block, because when we look at that data, I couldn't even tell you how many points we have on the map that are related to developing a town center. So that will feed into some of it. For example, the McCrimmon had I think I saw more than one comment, there should be a school in that area. So that will be fed into the 2 alternatives as well. What won't be fed into those alternatives is, say information put up at Shiloh or information put down in Park West. Other than you start to see what people like and don't like, that can also help influence what may be fed into those 2 alternatives that will be presented in March. Really, you're going to see a lot of that in the draft plan.
Yeah, I was just curious, certain areas of interest, go in and see, okay, this general sub-area, whatever you want to call it, what did the public say altogether about this area? Can we read those comments and get from that dance on how we want?
If you want to look at it now, you actually can. So what Brad is working on is all the comments that people wrote down. If you went to any of our events, there's like little flags of different colors that people wrote on. He is converting all of those into actual maps and Map Social. So I'm just going to kind of pull up, for example, And so just so everybody can follow where I'm getting, if you go to the town webpage, there's the icon for land use plan update. I went there, and then there was another icon for map social. If we get down in here, and this took me to the map social, if I scroll down, there's 22 maps out here and 402 public comments. He hasn't finished building all of them yet, but he's pretty close to finishing them. So, for example, we had a town hall open house, and there was 27 comments. He went through and started mapping those comments. So if you want to see what particularly people said, and not only are we scanning in all of those images with everybody's comments, just so we have a record of them, we're then manually entering them into a map so that it's easier for the consultant to start generating some trends with comments and things along those lines. But, for example, if I kind of zoomed in into one of these areas, it's like, I like the new library. See if I can do it in a note. And we need bike racks. So you'll see a lot of different information here. There's some other ones. We like Park West Village. We love this park. And it's referring to Morrisville Community Park. So they'll start to get some feedback for that. But interestingly enough, even though we divide it into sub areas, there's target areas that we see a lot of the same comments on, even though we were looking for comments town-wide at some of these events. There's a little bit of everything. So we didn't restrict what people, we tried to categorize them into what what's great about this area, what could use improvement, and if kind of the third category, if you could see, what would it be, kind of thing. But, you have east meets west, where there were 79 features. And there's lots of different stuff, for example. They think that Town Hall Drive is, designed well for walking. So the consultant will take that and say, okay, what made it designed well for walking potentially? So the fact that there's sidewalks on both sides of the road, is the fact that there's greenway, and they may take it, they'll sort of pull some information out of it. But it gives you an idea of some of the different comments. So we'll have it both ways as part of the plan, both the imagery of the original map, and then as well as this way.
Thanks, Courtney. Good. So let's move on to item 12.
I still have more, sorry.
Sorry?
No, but it's not on here. I just kind of two little quick things. So one, if you have not already RSVP'd for the event next Tuesday, it's not too late to do so, even though it did say to RSVP yesterday. I promise we'll still allow you to attend. But there is, it's really important that I would love to see each of you there. It's next Tuesday. It's kind of open house format, so you're not required to stay for the entire time, but it's from 6 to 8, and it's located here at Town Hall. So each of you are welcome to attend, and I hope to see you there. And I just also wanted to wish happy holidays to everybody as well, and if you're traveling, safe travels. And now, Chairman, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. So item 12. Rob. Arlene.
I'm good. Holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays, that's it.
Construction that's going south of Morrisville Carpenter / Aviation along the railroad track, is that railroad track construction or is that just before construction?
That is the bridge replacement for the railroad tracks, and that bridge was needed in order for us to then make our greenway connection underneath. Okay. So it's really a partnership between railroad and the town to be able to facilitate the greenway and then improve it, the crossing as well for the railroad company.
I have one comment that just happened to occur to me that in the last 2 weeks I happened to have spoken to two people from Preston, and it was very interesting, totally unsolicited. They didn't know I was anything to do with the planning board, but they both mentioned how they had absolutely opposed Park West Village and hated it and hated the idea, and now they love it so much and they don't want to move from Preston because it's there. So Just, you know.
I think they should not be allowed to go there.
just, you know, one of those things. I think over the years I've noticed that it's the uncertainty about these things that really gets people worried. So
just think of how much nicer it could be if they hadn't ruined it.
I think that's very true. The unknown is scary. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it was your first day of school in kindergarten or your first day of high school or middle school, the same concept. I mean, once you get there, it's less scary. I just happened to know a bunch of sixth graders that were entering sixth grade this year. They were worried about getting lost, you know, remembering their code to their locker, you know. And so once it happens, you realize it's not as bad. But I think that's very often. Change is difficult.
So I'd like to also wish the staff and my colleagues here a wonderful holiday season. We skipped 14. Well, we already had 14. That's next Tuesday, right? Go to 15. Anybody want to make a motion on item 15? Second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.